You're listening to The Pipeline, the Western Standards National Affairs program, recording this Wednesday, March 4th, 2020. Each week, we break down the issues, discuss them in depth, and examine some of the broader implications for Western Canada and beyond, featuring from Calgary, the Western Standards publisher, Derek Fildebrandt. Derek, how are you this week?
Buongiorno, I'm good.
Awesome. And featuring, returning this week, Deirdre Mitchell-McLean from Strathmore, a senior reporter with the Western Standard. How are you doing?
Very good, Paul. How are you?
I'm feeling way better than last week when I had some mystery illness, which, hey, maybe we'll even talk about a mystery illness this week. Hosted by myself, digital editor Paul Holmes, coming to you from Victoria, British Columbia, far away from the Alberta Budget. Topics this week will include the Alberta Budget and the Conservative Party leadership race and my coronavirus, the very latest on COVID-19 2021.
COVID-19, that is like a music, that's like a kind of a tech music festival, it sounds like. Techno music for the kids.
You know, yeah. The joke doesn't work the second time.
Everyone knows Paul forgot to hit play the first time we attempted to record this.
Hey, and for episode 11, I feel like, you know, forgetting once is pretty good. On my previous podcast,
people don't know how many times you've messed this
week.
up. People have no idea how many times you messed it up.
And actually, the last couple of weeks, we did a single take. So anyway. Before we get started, however, we are going to talk about membership of the Western Standard. It's very important. It's what keeps us going. If you are a member, thank you so much for signing up. And if you have you been thinking about becoming a member, check out the membership page on westernstandardonline.com and consider becoming a member today and supporting independent journalists free of government funding. All right. So the Alberta Budget. I know that there was a very lengthy lockup, and that's about all I know. So Deirdre, why don't you tell a foreigner like myself exactly what went down on Budget Day in Alberta?
So Budget Day, for those of us who actually live and, breathe for this stuff, was a very long day. Lockup started at 7 o'clock in the morning. The budget was not released until 3:15 p.m. So all of us here just on pins and needles wondering what the budget was going to say. And I mean, there were no great shocks. They only released their previous budget 4 months ago. So there's no real big changes from it. I don't think there was too many shocks in this next budget. It really piggybacks off of the last one.
All right. And Derek, what was your thoughts on the budget?
Well, there was two schools of thought going into it. From my perspective, I had the more pessimistic expectation. The two schools of thought were it was just going to continue more or less implementing what they did in the 2019 budget. And the other school of thought was this is where they were going to get very serious about reducing the size of government, really reducing spending. Some of the more hopeful conservatives thought that would be the case. I was less optimistic, and I love to say I told you so. That's exactly what happened. It was more or less just, as Deirdre said, continuing what happened in the first budget with a few small changes, but nothing very radical. It's really steady as she goes from the first budget, which is a cumulative $1 billion reduction in nominal spending over 4 years. Listening to the unions and to the NDP and to much of the media, you'd think that they were cutting 50 or 70% of the budget, but it's just $1 billion out of a budget that'll reach 58 billion, if I'm not, or revenue will reach 58 billion, so spending around 57.5 billion by 2023. $1 billion cut over that time, which is pretty small considering that Alberta's got a massive budget per capita compared to other provinces. We don't have to rehash that, but if, we had huge spending increases under Stelmach, huge spending increases under Redford, Prentice was a blip that never really got his budget through, but he had planned on just slowing growth. And then we had big increases again under the NDP, although, funny enough, smaller increases proportionally under the NDP than we had under both Redford and Stelmach. So if we were going into this, as the UCP told us, I think correctly, that the NDP had blown the budget and that Alberta was spending wildly, you'd think we'd see some actual big spending cuts, but we're seeing $1 billion over 4 years. But they are cutting some spending significantly within departments and moving things around. So within health, for example, spending on health is staying about the same. It's a minor increase, I believe, but it's effectively the same, although not accounting for inflation. I know Deirdre will want to point that out, but it's more or less staying the same, but they're moving spending around within health. And that allows the unions and the NDP to say, look, this particular item, normally in acute care, where the unions are more sensitive, that's getting a reduction. That's because money's moving from A to B within a department. So the narrative around this is that spending is just getting slashed and burned, that they're taking an axe to things, when in fact they're taking a scalpel to it. So they're taking all of the heat that they would take politically for genuinely large spending cuts right now, but they're not going to actually get much of the credit for it because, as we'll get into on the revenue side, it is hopeful at best that they're even going to get to a balanced budget in 4 years because these spending cuts are not that big.
They're not that big in certain areas. So post-secondary funding saw probably the biggest cut at around 20%. That's a Klein era cut. And now granted, like you said, it's the overall that they're looking at. So overall, they're only cutting 3% in funding, 3% of their spending. But some areas are definitely seeing a lot more than others. So while health may be maintained, or the health budget may be maintained, post-secondary budget has seen a huge decrease, and that will be passed on, of course, to future.
Well, actually, over the 4-year period here, they're actually just cutting 1.2 to 1.5 billion. So it's percent. So it's about $1 billion over 4 years out of a $58 billion budget. Spending is as high now as it was. Spending will be virtually the same as when they came to power. But Deirdre is correct that some departments are getting it harder than others, like post-secondary. Not to say post-secondary is not important, but in the pyramid of our needs, I mean, probably police and firefighters are at the top.
Yes, but the government is passing that on to residents, so they're not even paying for that.
Well, no,
but in terms of what government should do, post-secondary is important. But a lot of post-secondary isn't even actually teaching anybody and getting anybody degrees. A lot of it is just research and things like that, and it's up to universities to determine, how much is going to actually go towards that. And so the government's actually bringing in new enabling legislation on this, which is going to give the Minister of Post-Secondary Education, Dmitry Nikolaitis, greater power over how universities are spending their money here if they want to be able to get government money. But in the bigger picture, though, Deirdre is right. Some departments are getting a significant haircut here. Others are actually going to see increases. You're probably going to see more money. If J.C. Kenney's talk about government getting directly involved in business the way say the Trudeau government was federally in the old Trudeau, Pierre Trudeau or Lougheed in Alberta, with the government owning companies, which they're talking about now, you're going to see probably big spending increases in some departments. You're seeing freezes in others like health. And considering health takes up about 45% of the budget, it probably does need to get at least frozen. But the politics of this is they're taking the heat as if they're slashing and burning the government when things are more or less staying the same. So I would figure, and of course I would say this, but I would figure they may as well just significantly cut spending because the headlines will be exactly the same regardless. But right now they risk having the worst of both worlds, where they take all the heat for cutting some spending here, but they might potentially not even get to a balanced budget in their 4th year if their wild revenue projections don't come to pass. They're predicting oil to average over the next 3 years, between the 3 years,
65.
about a little. I think they project to get to 65, but projecting an average of about $61-62 a barrel on average over this time, with revenue increases, a super boom of increases of $4 billion in 2022 and another $4 billion in 2023. I mean, I have a hard time seeing how that's those are numbers that would require like a PST to take place, and their numbers are not showing a PST in here, and I don't think they're going to do that. So the point is that they might take all this heat over cutting a little bit of spending and not actually get the credit for a balanced budget at the end of the road unless these revenues take place.
Oh.
A provincial budget is typically just health, education, and then a bunch of other things, right? I mean, you can't cut a budget. Yeah, you can't cut a provincial budget in this country without cutting health and education in some substantial way, right?
That's where we spend the most. So
exactly, yeah.
Well, that's where I always kind of thought their campaign commitments on this were a bit funny. Is they said, well, we're not going to touch health and education. Well, that's 60% of the budget, and everything else, like if you're taking the biggest piece off the table. Health and education sound the nicest, but remember, those departments are just as wasteful as any other department. There's a ton of bureaucrats in them. There's a ton of Alberta's government employees are the best paid in the country, in many cases by a huge margin. That's what's driving up the costs. And if you're not going to touch those things, you're not going to get to a balanced budget, which is one reason the Tories, maybe Deirdre can elaborate on this. She did an article on this yesterday, why the Tories have been actually raising some significant taxes in the background, but really downplaying it, actually denying that they're doing it, even though it's right there in black and white in the budget.
Yeah. And so as much as...
Deirdre, why don't you run us through some of the taxes that are in this budget and the last that have not really gotten very much attention?
So in the last budget, of course, was bracket creep. And I think that we have talked about that before, but what bracket creep is when the government doesn't index income to inflation. And so what happens when they don't do that is that if you do get those increases during the year, your tax bracket actually doesn't move with those regular cost of living increases. So people move into a different tax bracket. Now, I will say as well that Alberta has, we have 3 tax brackets. Like, we're not like other provinces that have like 6 or 7. So it's not as much of an issue in Alberta, but at the same time, if those brackets don't change when most people are getting, like I said, a cost of living increase each year or just a general raise, they can move into the next tax bracket when normally that would have been indexed to the cost of living increase, the cost of inflation. So that was introduced in 2019. And that one's always fun because Jason Kenney, as Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayer Federation, was a staunch defender against bracket creep and had been even at the federal level when he was a federal politician. So it was just major hypocrisy when he actually gave bracket creep to Alberta. It was fantastic.
Well, that's the big one, and then they brought in a number of other taxes, more along this.
Tax?
Yes, education property tax, which people don't really understand very well because it's much more complicated. The municipalities collect it for the province. Yeah. So when education property taxes go up, people tend to actually blame the municipalities for it, right, not the province. But it is a provincial tax that goes to education. It's a very strange and regressive tax that we still have.
But one of the things
that's going to be going up by a massive margin. Well,
it's 3.1% on average, but I did have a friend suggest that what the municipalities should do, just like with the carbon tax, when that was listed on your power and gas bills, that it should be listed as provincial government education tax increase.
Mm-hmm. They do that in British Columbia when you get your property taxes. In most, I think every municipality, because we have a government agency that oversees all that, right? A provincial government agency, and there's a standard statement you get, and it shows you what each of those taxes are, who gets that money, and what you're actually paying. And so people do know when they pay the education component how much of their property
it is there on your statement when you get your property tax form here, but I'm not sure how much the control the municipalities have to more clearly specify this is for the province. We did not increase this tax; the province did. Because the municipalities don't get to collect that. It's the same way as when you pay your income tax. You're not necessarily, people don't even know how much is going to the federal and how much is going to the provincial and how much of that gets washed around in the bureaucracy of Ottawa. They have no idea. They've also brought in some sin taxes. Now, a lot of kind of big government conservatives are okay with these things. They say, well, if you don't like tobacco tax, don't smoke. Okay, well, the answer should be if you don't like income tax, don't work. The fact is, this is a personal choice people make. Unless the government's got a right to tell you what to do with your own adults, what to do with their own bodies, they don't make much sense. But they've increased the tobacco tax in the province, so big government progressives and big government conservatives both like them. And Alberta's first vaping tax.
Yes.
Woohoo!
This is the dumbest tax I have ever seen. I mean,
this affects Derek directly, obviously.
No, it does not. But look, vaping is the biggest victory for getting people off of tobacco since we learned that tobacco was bad for you. This is a wildly safer, or less harmful, I should say, alternative to smoking. They're saying they're going to do this to prevent youth from getting it. Well, it's already illegal for youth to get it. If youth are getting this stuff, then clearly the problem is with the point of sale access. It's not with the price here. So this is
it less than the tobacco tax, though?
It is.
Well, then there you go, Derek. It's still bad. It's just not as bad. And so you're decreasing the marginal attractiveness of one versus the other. So now, on a relative scale, smoking becomes more economical. It's still more expensive.
Yeah, there's more taxes. The cigarette tax is approximately 142%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's the tax on tobacco products.
Well, I don't even believe in tobacco taxes.
Vaping products are 20%. So there's still...
Yeah, one is 120% too high, the other one's 20% too high.
Well, the vaping tax...
This is people's personal business, and it's not the business of politicians to say what we can put in our bodies. If I want to drink gasoline, that's my business, and that's why we have to get rid of the gasoline tax too.
The vaping tax in the province of British Columbia is 7% because that's our sales tax. So you guys really shouldn't complain. You don't have one of those.
That's the BC advantage.
Yeah, if you're vaping, come to British Columbia. You pay lower taxes now than Alberta. All right.
The point of all this is on taxes, though, is as Deirdre reported in the Standard yesterday, the finance minister and the premier are going around saying, we promised we would balance the budget without raising any taxes.
Right.
And there's a growing list of taxes, some of them big, some of them small, tobacco and vaping on the small side, but very big, especially over time, will be the education property tax and the bracket creep increase to our income taxes. So this is, so people bleeding that, this is all just spending cuts and no tax increases. It's tax revenue that's going to grow 800% more than spending will be cut. So people who want more taxes and more spending are getting 8 times a better deal out of this than libertarians and conservatives who want to see this done on the spending side.
From a government revenue perspective, bracket creep is the best thing ever because every additional dollar of taxes comes in at the highest marginal rate for that person. And so you're not getting, if your lowest marginal rate is 15%, you're not getting that on every additional dollar people make. You're getting the 35 or whatever percent at the high end, right?
But
so
remember, Alberta only has 3 tax brackets.
Yeah.
Right? Our taxes don't increase until we reach 120. Is it 120,000? It was just under whatever MLA's made.
Right.
Actually,
oh, okay. Interesting.
that's the first tax bracket. So our first tax bracket is up to $100 and some thousand. So like that is something that no other province has. Every other province has at least 2 to 3 before they hit 120,000. right? Like Alberta's just so.
I didn't know we were talking about Bernie Sanders on the podcast today.
To conclude this segment, then, provincial governments like to tax people. All right, on we go. Speaking of politics, the Conservative Party's leadership race now looks. We talked about, I think last week, Derek, that Peter MacKay had this in the bag. We're seeing a lot of O'Toole's racking up quite a few endorsements. I saw that there was an endorsement from Chuck Strahl this morning. Came through on my my magic email. Is there any hope here left? Is there anybody else we should be looking at? Why don't we start with you, Deirdre? What do you see happening on the ground?
Well, I do agree that Peter MacKay has this in the bag because he has the name recognition, he has the political history and the background to really be able to take away this race. But I mean, Andrew Scheer, in my mind, was not even a contender in 2017.
Right. Yeah, me too.
So, look what happened there. So I think it's important that we do pay attention to the other leadership contenders, because what if you have another Andrew Scheer? And who might that possibly be?
Well, and it's interesting because we're seeing down, just for comparison, because I watch U.S. politics a lot, with the Democratic race, it started out as being Biden versus Sanders, but then all these other people came in, and you just never know how these things are going to shake out. And then here we are, a few months later, it's Biden versus Sanders, and I suspect that's probably what we're going to see, in the Conservative Party here is we're going to see a lot of names fly by, and I think we have seen that already. But
yeah.
I know there was some candidates in particular that you were looking at for leadership, Deirdre, that were worth mentioning and discussing before the show.
Well, and okay, so even though I don't see them as having a huge opportunity to, really become something in this leadership race, but there's only 2 female contenders. Marilyn Gladu out of Ontario and Leslyn Lewis, also out of Ontario. But still, there's only 2 female contenders. One is backed by Campaign Life Coalition, so very pro-life and has their endorsement. Marilyn Gladu has really walked, I think she has walked a good line on allowing private members bills, allowing free votes, she's just using basic math, saying over 75% of Canadians want to have things like abortion services available through the public health system. That's a really big number. But so Marilyn Gladu is looking at that and saying, private members can certainly bring this forward. We can have a discussion about it, but I really don't think it's going to gain traction. She doesn't see any need to institute something like whipped votes when it comes to conscience related matters. Mm-hmm. And and I think that's important. Leslyn Lewis, like I said, very pro-life. And now whether or not, the thing is, as much as some people, I'm sure Derek, you'll comment on this, as much as a lot of people don't want to see this as gaining, they don't want to see these types of issues gaining traction during the Conservative Party leadership race, Andrew Scheer or his critics, because it may have not actually stemmed with Andrew Scheer, but it kind of did. But his critics made it a really big issue about whether or not he would legislate on social issues in that way. And the thing is that there are a lot of swing voters in Canada. There are many much less partisan people. They're the ones that will move their vote. And one of the things that critics and analysts and pundits suggested during the 2019 general election was that Andrew Scheer's waffling on the subject just didn't give people the faith that they needed to have in him as a leader to not make these massive changes. So whether people like it or not, this is of concern, I think, to a number of Canadians that would possibly vote for a conservative leader, a conservative prime minister. I think it's an issue, and I think it's one that they have to deal with, and they have to deal with it well in order to be contenders in 2023 or whenever that happens.
I have some thoughts on that. Derek, you want me to go first, or you want to?
Why don't you have at it if you're chumping at the
Well,
mic here?
you know, here's where I'm at. If you'd asked me a few years ago, I would have said that I was reluctantly pro-choice. I might have been the Hillary Clinton of a decade ago opinion, safe, legal, and rare. And my opinion, frankly, has evolved over the past few years to become less pro-choice than before, because we see these crazy radicals, that are just, I just wish in this country and in the U.S. as well, and I probably watch too much U.S. politics for my own health, but can we have a mature adult conversation about this issue without everybody freaking out?
No, there's no way to have a mature conversation about this.
And Canada is fairly unique in the world insofar as we have zero regulations on abortion, zero. And most countries in the world have some, and they're still somehow surviving and getting along, right? And so that's the big problem I have with this is if you, and there was a poll that came out, I wish I could remember the source, but there was a poll that came out and asked about, in particular, Canadians that supported third trimester abortions. And the majority of Canadians, I think it was Maclean's, but I can't remember. And the majority of Canadians are opposed to third trimester abortions, right?
As the only
guys, let's not, I see what Paul said, we can't have a reasonable conversation. We're trying to discuss the politics around this, and we are really just about to dive into making this the abortion episode. So I'm going to abort this conversation. Deirdre, if you have something to add to this, go ahead. But I really don't want this to be the abortion episode.
I will add to this really quickly.
Yeah.
Women don't decide in the third trimester that they no longer want to have a baby.
Okay, so this is an abortion episode.
This is
I agree with you.
This is a conversation that belongs between a woman and her doctor. And the thing is, Ireland was the most perfect example. They had
guys, this is now an abortion. We are talking about the Tory leadership race, and now we're talking about Ireland.
Okay,
we are way off, and I am pulling rank, and I'm pulling this back to the Tory leadership race.
This is
there are some pro-lifers in it, and that's controversial.
Well, and I think to Deirdre's point, and I'll scale back on this, Derek, because you're right. We don't want to turn it into that episode, but
it's already there, and I'm trying to pull it back.
Point, this is an issue. People are going to look at their leadership this leadership campaign, and who ultimately the person that is elected leader of the Conservative Party. They're going to have a stance on this, and it's going to have to be saleable to the Canadian public, right?
That's right.
And look, this is going to be a perennial issue in every leadership race.
Yeah.
And what normally happens is anyone who's got a real chance of winning takes a very soft position on it. They're trying to middle. They're trying to take a position that don't entirely alienate social conservatives, but don't scare off everybody else who's afraid of anything happening on this. I think Paul's right. I think actually the majority of Canadians are open to something on this. The problem is the debate, it's polarized everywhere on the planet. You have this, but it's particularly polarized in Canada. Anyone brings this up, and pro-lifers do themselves no favors when they're saying let's just ban it. And because that sounds wild. That is a very small proportion of Canadians, of even pro-lifers, who want that. But anyway, none of the pro-life candidates are going to win. In fact, no one besides anyone named Peter MacKay is going to win. So I agreed to have this as a topic on here because it's happening and it's important, but it's also not important because it's already finished. The party's decided who's going to win. The dairy cartel has already spoken. Peter MacKay is the leader-elect, or he is essentially the crown prince of the party right now, just waiting for the current king to expire. It's
All
already
right.
over.
So, and I'm actually curious, Derek, because I think you may have paid more attention than I did in the 2017 leadership race. Did you see the possibility of it coming down to Andrew Scheer and Maxime Bernier?
But we always knew it would be once Kevin O'Leary was out. We with Kevin O'Leary in, we thought it would be Bernier versus O'Leary. Funny enough, O'Leary actually may have won. I think that's what scared him. I don't think he wanted to win by the end. But once O'Leary was out, we knew it was going to come down to Scheer at the end of the day. But as much as we might compare this to, say, the Republican or Democratic primaries, they're not the same because there's no way to weed people out, except in the rare circumstances like O'Leary, where he just decided, oh shit, I might win this thing, I'm out. Yeah. Because in the states they stagger voting. You have Iowa, then New Hampshire, South Carolina, Super Tuesday, and they vote in pieces. And so you have a way to test the candidates, and the field narrows out. So okay, Bloomberg, he's not going to be able to buy his way to the presidency as easily as he thought, so he's out. And so the field will narrow down. That does not happen in any Canadian race because we don't have any kind of staggered voting. It's always on one day. And yeah, people will drop off the ballots, but it's got much less drama and much less strategy behind it than in the American system. I thought Andrew Scheer had a chance of winning it. I went into the convention believing that Bernier had a very strong chance. I thought better than 50% chance of winning. But I was not discounting Andrew Scheer, as crazy as a decision as that might be.
Really?
I think as an outsider, because I wasn't involved much in that one. I knew who Andrew Scheer was, and I kind of, I didn't have a strong opinion one way or the other, and I really thought the guy didn't have a chance. Like, I knew he'd be in the top 5, but Anyway, that was my totally outside opinion. I think because I did join to vote, and I think I had him on like 3rd or 5th or something on my own ballot because it's like, okay,
I had him like he's 15th.
Yeah, he was milk toast enough that I could, I could hold my nose. But it was Anyway, it's very different this time. I really think you guys. I think to wrap it up, in lieu of a future abortion episode.
We're going to have to just do an abortion episode so you guys can get this off your chest.
Well, when you get 3 people who are nominally pro-choice in a room fighting on the issue of abortion, it just goes to show you the level to which this issue can.
Well, I'm not abortion pro-choice. I'm pro everything choice.
There you go.
The term has got a very different meaning for radical libertarians than for abortion activists.
Fair enough. All right, so that's it. For those of you who tuned into the
coronavirus.
No, I know. For those of you who tuned into the Conservative Party race, it's over. So on to the coronavirus. And which, by the way, we should probably not call it the coronavirus because I learned this week from the WHO that the coronavirus is actually a virus that exists in many forms all over the world all the time.
Yes, there are coronaviruses.
There are many coronaviruses. And the one in particular that we're concerned about is called COVID-19. Yeah. So we will talk about COVID-19. So we are not considered.
We're going to have to. This is going to be truncated. We're almost out of time here.
Almost out of time.
Hopefully, Paul's been recording this though.
Absolutely. So we see lots and lots of people now. People are dying in the U.S. State of emergency. Very close to Canada.
Washington State.
Yeah, everybody's got to be aware of this. We're watching.
Well, maybe going on. Well, let's zero it in here. Last week on our morning call, there was some talk about us doing a coronavirus story, and I said no more coronavirus. The media are trumping this up all the time. I mean, it's just kind of a clickbait thing. We're the Western Standard. We focus on Western Canada. So if there's a big story related to it, to Western Canada, and it's not just a little clickbait thing, fine. But I more or less said that's it. No more coronavirus. Couple hours later, we get a phone call, and Deirdre's breaking biggest story in the country that day on coronavirus. So Deirdre, why don't you tell us about what the hell happened to cause me to tear up our no more coronavirus story rule 2 hours after I pronounced it?
So what happened was we had insider information that a flight from Vancouver to Winnipeg had been basically quarantined upon landing in Winnipeg because there was a passenger who had become unresponsive during the flight. And so as everything was unfolding, I was basically going off of information from this one source. It couldn't be verified, so no one else was writing about it. We were all trying to get more information, but because we had insider information, we were moving off of what they were telling us. And so the update came, by 5 o'clock, I had now heard back from the Winnipeg Airport Authority. I had heard back from WestJet, and both of them, I got an email from WestJet, but I actually spoke to, I believe it's Tyler McAfee from the Winnipeg Airport Authority, and he was, oh yeah, every day is busy at the airport, no big deal. I'm like, okay. And, so it was really interesting. But the thing is that incident, which actually the passenger who became unresponsive during the flight, she did test negative for the coronavirus, and she was specifically tested for that. That was the big fear at the time, because this passenger had connected in Vancouver from China. So, obviously we know that that's kind of ground zero at the moment. Well, it used to be before Iran popped up with all of these cases, but
It's nice to blame Iran again.
Yeah, right. Luckily, I'm still following all those.
And the Italians are.
Yes, yeah, Italy has it as well. Like they've got I think they have over 25 cases now.
Well, what was one thing that was really interesting?
Or 29 deaths, sorry.
One thing that was interesting in the remaining time we've got here is so the sources we had said that this passenger was unresponsive, essentially passed out on the floor with a high fever, and they had come in from China wearing a face mask. Now, we all want to be sensitive here, but I would not like to sit beside that person on the plane right now. I think we'd all feel a little bit nervous. But it was very strange. None of the rest of the media noted that this person was a connection coming in from China via Vancouver. That was entirely left out of every other media outlet story. Now, we don't know if that was them being a bit of a, politically correct and sensitive, or if that was just that the airport authority and WestJet were just not giving them that information. We had a totally different pipeline of information, no pun intended, that gave us that information. But none of the others were reporting that. And again, we don't know if that's just they were being politically correct about it, or if they just didn't have it. But either way, it was a big win for the Western Standard, and we had Deirdre breaking the biggest story in the country that day, even if it turned out not to be coronavirus at the end of the day, or whatever we were supposed to call it.
Well, that's it, guys.
It's
COVID-19.
COVID-19 fest.
Yeah. So thanks for joining us this week. Deirdre, great to see you. As always, great to see you, Derek. And if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, hit, comment, share, do all the things.
Love me.
And we'll see everybody next week.
Ciao.